Liechtenstein is a tiny country. It sits between Switzerland and Austria. Mountains are all around it. For a long time, it has been a quiet place. It is one of the smallest countries in the world. Its history is mostly peaceful. People there live their lives. They work hard, they value their independence. This little country was not always so isolated. It was once part of something bigger. It was part of the Holy Roman Empire. When that empire ended, Liechtenstein became sovereign. That means it ruled itself, but it still had ties, strong ties to Austria, and it was part of the German Confederation. This was a group of German-speaking states. They worked together, they protected each other. This Europe in the mid-1800s was a messy place. Things were changing fast. Big powers wanted more power. Prussia was getting stronger. It wanted to lead the German states. Austria had been the main power for a long time. It wanted to keep that role. These two giants were on a collision course. They were heading for a fight. A fight for control over the German lands. Liechtenstein was caught in the middle. It was small. It had little say in big matters, but it had duties. As part of the German Confederation, it had to contribute. It had to send soldiers if there was a war. This was just how things worked. You were part of the group. You played your part, even if your part was very, very small. The idea of Liechtenstein fighting in a major war seems strange now. It is a neutral country. It has no army today, but back then things were different. It had a small military force. It was more like a militia. Men served for a bit. Then they went back to their farms or shops. It was not a professional army like Prussia's or Austria's. It was a citizen force, meant for defense or for fulfilling obligations to the Confederation. The people of Liechtenstein probably did not want war. They had their own concerns. Their fields needed tending, their families needed care. The thought of sending their sons to fight was not welcome. No one wants their home to be disrupted, especially for someone else's fight. But the political winds were blowing hard, stronger than any mountain breeze, and they were bringing conflict. Prussia was led by Otto von Bismarck. He was a very clever politician. He wanted to unite Germany under Prussian rule. He saw Austria as the main obstacle. He was ready to fight them. Austria was led by Emperor Franz Joseph. He was trying to hold his empire together. It was a vast empire. Many different peoples lived in it. Italians, Hungarians, Czechs, and more. Keeping them all loyal was a challenge. Austria saw Prussia's ambitions as a threat to its own power, a threat to its way of life. So the stage was set. Two big players. A lot of tension. And many smaller states, like Liechtenstein, watching nervously, knowing they might have to pick a side, or at least fulfill their part. Liechtenstein was small. Its army was tiny. It would not change the outcome of a war. Everyone knew that. But duty was duty. And for a country that valued its place in the world, even a small place, duty mattered. They could not just ignore their obligations, not without risking their standing, not without risking their friendships. The people in Liechtenstein lived simple lives. They knew about the troubles in Europe. News traveled. Maybe not fast, but it did travel. They would talk in their homes, in their churches, about what might happen, about the possibility of war. They would worry for their sons, for their neighbors. These were not warriors. They were just men. Men who might have to become soldiers, for a time. Then, if they were lucky, they would come home. Back to their quiet lives, back to their families. The future was uncertain. But one thing was clear. Change was coming to Europe, and even tiny Liechtenstein would feel its effects. The year 1866 arrived. Tensions between Austria and Prussia grew unbearable. They were going to war. There was no stopping it. The German Confederation found itself in a difficult spot. It had to decide which side to support. Or rather, many members had to decide. Some sided with Prussia, others with Austria. Liechtenstein, because of its long-standing ties, sided with Austria. This meant they had to send soldiers. The German Confederation had rules about this. Each member state had to provide a certain number of men. It was based on their size. Liechtenstein's contribution was tiny. They were asked for a contingent, a small group of soldiers. Because Liechtenstein's army was not what most people imagine when they think of an army. It was more of a standing militia. It had been formed mainly for police duties and for ceremonial purposes. It was made up of about 80 men, sometimes a few more, sometimes a few less. These were not career soldiers. They were citizens who served part-time, they had jobs, they had families. The call came. 80 men were needed. This was almost their entire force. It was a big deal for such a small country. They were not sending thousands. They were sending almost everyone they had. It showed their commitment, their desire to fulfill their duty, even if it felt a bit like a symbolic gesture. The men who were chosen were probably not thrilled. War is serious business, even if they were not going to the main battlefields. They would be leaving home, leaving comfort, going to an unknown place. They were farmers, tradesmen, craftsmen. Not people who trained for war every day. Their training would have been basic: how to march, how to use a rifle, how to follow orders. Preparing for war in Liechtenstein was a simple affair. No grand parades, no huge stockpiles of weapons. They would have gathered their uniforms. Simple clothes, likely green or gray. They would have checked their rifles, their basic gear. A pack. Some provisions. It would have been very practical, very plain. The men would have said goodbye to their families. Wives, children, parents. There would have been sadness, worry, but also a sense of duty. A quiet resolve. They were going because they had to, because their country had an obligation. Their mission was not to fight on the front lines. They were not going to charge into battle against the Prussians. That would have been folly. Their job was different. They were assigned to guard the Brenner Pass. This is a mountain pass. It connects Austria and Italy. It was an important strategic point. It controlled movement between the two regions. If you held the pass, you could control who went through. So, in the summer of 1866, the small contingent of 80 men left Liechtenstein. They marched out of their quiet valley. They headed south, towards the mountains, towards the pass. They were part of a larger Austrian force. But they were their own unit, the Liechtenstein contingent. Their journey would have been long. It's on foot, through the countryside. It was a beautiful land, but their minds were likely elsewhere. Thinking about what lay ahead, thinking about home. They would have wondered what this war would be like for them. Would they see combat? Would they be safe? No one really knew for sure. The departure itself would have been low-key. Not a lot of fuss. Maybe some villagers came out to wave goodbye. Maybe a few tears were shed. But it was not a grand military send-off. It was the departure of a small group of ordinary men, fulfilling an extraordinary duty. For their small nation, for their alliance, 80 men walked away from their homes, into the unknown, hoping to return and hoping that their country would remain safe. That was their main goal, to do their job, and to come back, whole. The 80 men from Liechtenstein traveled south. Their destination was the Brenner Pass. It is a high mountain pass in the Alps. It has always been an important route for trade, for armies. It connects Austria with Italy. When they arrived, their task was simple: to guard the pass, make sure no one unauthorized got through, support the Austrian forces already there. But importantly, this was not the main battleground. The real fighting was happening far away. It's in Bohemia, where the Prussian and Austrian armies clashed in huge, brutal battles. Places like Königgrätz, thousands of men would die in a single day there. For the Liechtenstein contingent, their war experience was very different. They saw no combat, they heard no gunshots fired in anger, no cannon fire. They were not engaged in any battles. Their days were quiet, routine. They patrolled the pass, they kept watch, they set up checkpoints. They helped with logistics, they just performed guard duty. Imagine their daily life. Waking up in the mountains, the air was probably crisp, cold even in summer at that altitude. They would have had their simple meals, cooked over a fire, or brought to them. They would have stood watch. Hours looking out at the winding mountain roads, watching for anything unusual, but mostly seeing nothing out of the ordinary. They would have interacted with Austrian soldiers, other units guarding the pass. They might have shared stories, shared a pipe, maybe played cards. They were all soldiers of the same side. Even if their uniforms were a bit different, their language the same, the weather would have been a constant companion. Sunshine one day, rain the next, maybe even some early snow. The mountains are unpredictable. They would have learned to deal with it. They would have grown accustomed to the routine. Weirdum. Compare this to the soldiers fighting in Bohemia. They were facing mass cavalry charges, artillery bombardments, close quarters, bayonet fights, disease, death. The Liechtensteiners were lucky. They were in a quiet corner of the war. They were doing their bit without facing the horror. They probably knew this too. They would have heard rumors, news of the heavy fighting. They would have felt relieved to be where they were. During this time, something unusual happened. An Italian officer joined them. He was not a prisoner. He was not a new recruit. He was a friendly fellow, a liaison officer, perhaps. Maybe he was part of another unit that got separated. Or maybe he just found comfort and company with the Liechtensteiners. He spoke Italian, but probably some German too. Enough to communicate. He liked being with them. They were a small, close-knit group. They were good company. They were probably quite friendly people, not harsh or demanding. He integrated into their daily life. He shared their meals, he shared their watch. He became one of them. Not officially, perhaps, but in spirit. He was just another man with them in the mountains. It speaks to the character of the Liechtenstein soldiers that they would welcome an outsider, that they would form a bond with him. They were not hardened to suspicious warriors. They were men from a peaceful valley. They understood human connection, even in a time of war. So, the days turned into weeks. The war raged elsewhere, but for the 80 men from Liechtenstein, it was mostly peaceful. A long camping trip almost, with uniforms and rifles, and a sense of duty. They held the pass. They did their job, they stayed safe, and they made a friend, an Italian friend, who became part of their small group. They were now 81 men, informally, waiting for the war to end, waiting for the order to go home, unscathed, and with an unexpected addition to their ranks. This quiet, uneventful deployment was a testament to their luck and to their humanity. The Austro-Prussian War did not last long. It was swift and decisive. Prussia, with its modern army and brilliant tactics, won. Austria suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Königgrätz. This battle effectively ended Austria's dominance in German affairs. The German Confederation was dissolved. A new order was coming to Central Europe. For the soldiers of Liechtenstein at the Brenner Pass, the news would have arrived slowly. They would have heard that the war was over, that Austria had lost. This meant their job was done. The need to guard the pass was no more. The order to return home came. Imagine the relief, the joy. After weeks or months away from their homes, they were finally going back. Back to their families, back to their normal lives. The journey back would have been similar to the journey out. Long, on foot. But this time, their spirits would have been lighter. They were going home, and they were all alive. Not a single man was lost. As they made their way back, they were 81 men, not 80. The Italian officer was still with them. He had no reason to stay at the pass. His own country, Italy, had also been involved in the war, albeit in a different theater against Austria. But for him, the Liechtenstein contingent had become his temporary home, his friends. Why did he come with them? Maybe he had no specific orders, no clear direction for his own return. Maybe he simply preferred the company of these friendly, unassuming men. He had found camaraderie with them. A sense of belonging. It was a simple human choice, to stick with the people he had come to know, the people he had shared his days with. So, they marched, the 80 original soldiers, and their new Italian friend, back through the mountains, back towards the Rhine River Valley, and back to Liechtenstein. When they finally reached their homeland, it was a moment of quiet triumph. The people of Liechtenstein would have welcomed them back, proud that their men had fulfilled their duty, but happy that they were all safe. And then, someone counted. Maybe an officer, maybe a relative. 80 men left. 81 men returned. The story must have spread quickly. A chuckle. A smile. The Liechtenstein army went to war and came back with more men than it left with. It's a truly unique detail in military history. Most armies count their losses. They're dead. They're wounded. Liechtenstein counted an unexpected gain. A new friend. This event was not officially recorded as a major military achievement. It was not a battle won. It was a charming anecdote. A human story from a time of great conflict. It perfectly captured the spirit of Liechtenstein's involvement. It was not about fighting or conquering. It was about duty, presence, and perhaps a bit of luck. The Italian officer was not a recruit. He was not formally enlisted. He was a companion, a tag-along, a friendly face who decided to stay with the group he had bonded with. His presence highlighted the very unwarlike experience of the Liechtenstein contingent. They didn't make enemies, they made a friend. This small, almost comical detail stands out. In a war that reshaped Europe, one tiny nation's army came back stronger, not in terms of military might, but in terms of numbers, and perhaps in spirit. It's a story that has been told and retold, because it's so unexpected, so genuinely human. It shows that, even in the context of war, simple acts of friendship can happen. And sometimes, those acts become the most memorable part of the whole experience. The 81st man became a symbol of Liechtenstein's peaceful engagement, a symbol of their unique place in a turbulent world. The Austro-Prussian War changed Europe. It ended the German Confederation. It paved the way for a unified Germany under Prussian leadership. For Liechtenstein, it also brought big changes. The experience of sending their army to the Brenner Pass was a pivotal moment. Not because of any battles fought, but because of what it revealed. It showed that their small army, their military contribution, was not going to make a difference in major European conflicts. Their role was symbolic, their resources were limited, so just 2 years after the war, in 1868, Liechtenstein made a big decision. They disbanded their army. They decided they did not need a standing military force. This was a radical step for a country at that time. Most nations, even small ones, kept an army for defense, for prestige. But Liechtenstein chose a different path. They chose permanent neutrality. They would not take sides in future wars. They would focus on their own development, on their people. They believed that their best defense was no defense. No army meant no target. No reason for others to attack them. This decision was practical. Maintaining an army, even a small one, was expensive. It took men away from their farms and trades. It was a drain on resources, and after the 1866 experience, it seemed pointless. Their men had gone, but they hadn't really fought a war. They had guarded a pass. They had made a friend. The story of the 81 men perfectly captures this spirit. It is a story about duty, yes. But it is also a story about peaceful engagement, about human connection. It's not a tale of military might. It's a tale of surprising return. It embodies Liechtenstein's future path, a path of peace and diplomacy, not conflict. Today, Liechtenstein is one of the few countries in the world without a standing army. They rely on their neutrality, they rely on international law, and they have a strong police force for internal security. If there were ever a major threat, they would likely rely on Switzerland for defense. Switzerland, too, is a neutral country and a close neighbor. The legacy of the 1866 war and the curious return of the 81 men is about more than just a funny anecdote. It is about a nation finding its true identity, its true strength, not in weapons or soldiers, but in its commitment to peace, to its people, to a different way of existing in a world often consumed by conflict. This small country, nestled in the Alps, learned a valuable lesson. Their strength was not in fighting. It was in avoiding fights. Their contribution to the world would not be through military power, but through stability, through being a good neighbor, through being a quiet, prosperous place where people could live well. The story remains a charming reminder of this journey. 80 men left, 81 came back. It's a detail that makes you smile, it makes you think about what war means and what peace means. It highlights the unexpected turns life can take, even in the most serious of circumstances. It is a story of a small country's unique war, a story that shows that sometimes the most profound outcomes are not found on battlefields. They are found in unexpected friendships, in a quiet return, in a decision to choose a path of lasting peace. Liechtenstein's army came back from a war with more men than they left with, and then they went home, disbanded their army, and never fought again. That's a pretty good ending for a war story, I think. It is a very human story, one that truly happened, and it shaped a nation's future.